Imagine an afternoon that seemed completely peaceful inside Kensington Palace. Autumn sunlight streamed through the tall windows, casting a familiar stillness over Prince William's study. But in that very moment, everything began to collapse. William opened a sealed black leather folder secured with extreme confidentiality. It was not an official briefing, not a ceremonial document. It was the top secret medical file of the woman he loved most, Catherine. Just the first few lines were enough to drain the color from his face. His hands began to tremble. His breath stalled. Because what was written inside was not simply a medical record. It was a secret buried for more than 10 years. A secret capable of destroying his marriage, his family, and even the future throne of England. This is not an unfounded rumor. This is a chain of events the royal family has tried to erase from history. A file revealing genetic abnormalities directly linked to Prince Louis. A covert test conducted immediately after the child's birth, and what followed was an unprecedented, large-scale cover-up. For more than 10 years, Catherine chose absolute silence. 3 doctors involved in the delivery suddenly vanished from the Royal Medical Registry, and a plan codenamed Project Dove was activated to eliminate every trace. This story is not merely a medical issue, it is a question of bloodline, of succession, and of the fragile boundary between truth and what the royal family allows the public to know. So what do you believe? Is Prince Louis truly William's biological son? Comment number 1 if you believe this is the greatest cover-up in royal history, or number 2 if you think it is all just a serious medical misunderstanding. But before you judge, keep watching, because to understand why William collapsed like that, we must turn back time to the earliest warning signs. In the public eye, Catherine has always appeared as the embodiment of royal perfection. A composed smile, a flawless posture, not a single moment of losing control in front of the cameras. But it was precisely that perfection that led careful observers to begin asking questions. Because behind an image of near absolute stability lay gaps that were difficult to explain. Unannounced disappearances, sudden schedule changes, and most notably, health-related signs mentioned only in vague terms. For many years, Catherine was described as someone with extraordinary resilience, but royal sources have revealed that she fainted multiple times in private settings. Sudden episodes of dizziness occurred even without a demanding schedule. Some incidents reportedly required late-night hospital visits. No press releases, no confirming images. Only schedules quietly canceled the following days with generic health explanations. What caught observers' attention was not the hospitalizations themselves, but how the palace handled the information. Silence, speed, and no trace left behind. Catherine's 3 pregnancies were also marked by similar irregularities. Each pregnancy was announced as healthy, yet around the time of delivery, she often disappeared from public view longer than expected. There were periods when no official photographs were released at all. No appearances before the media according to royal tradition. Questions began to surface in tabloid press only to be swiftly shut down with reassuring statements. Everything was fine, just routine checks. The number that startled many when looking back was this. Within 10 years, the palace issued more than 20 routine health explanations to account for gaps in Catherine's schedule. 20 times, not a small number for someone consistently described as healthy and disciplined. This proves nothing on its own, but it creates a pattern. And for investigators, patterns always matter more than isolated events. Another detail rarely mentioned is the change in medical personnel surrounding Catherine. Several doctors once listed as part of the royal healthcare team suddenly stopped being named. No retirement announcements, no clear transfers. They simply disappeared from the familiar circle. For the royal family, staff changes are normal, but when those changes align with sensitive periods, they become something that demands closer scrutiny. Catherine has never spoken directly about any of this. She has maintained absolute silence. No personal interviews, no memoirs, not a single complaint. That silence can be interpreted as royal discipline, but it can also be seen as a choice to protect something greater than herself. Because in the royal family, health is not just personal, it is tied to image, to stability, and to the future of an entire line of succession. What must be emphasized is that there is no public evidence confirming that Catherine suffers from a serious illness or any definitive abnormality. But it also cannot be denied that there are questions that have never been clearly answered. And it is precisely that information gap that allows theories to emerge. When the public is not given the full truth, they will find ways to piece together the fragments on their own. These early signs could have been nothing more than coincidence. They could simply have been the result of pressure and the extreme secrecy of royal life. But to some insiders, they were believed to be only the surface of a much deeper story. A story not centered solely on Catherine's health, but one involving decisions made in silence, tests that were never named, and questions that no one was ever allowed to ask. Because these secrets did not stop at health alone. According to some speculative sources, they led to an even more disturbing discovery, a discovery that could change how the public views that seemingly perfect family. And that is the moment when the story entered an entirely different phase. The moment Prince William opened that file was not captured by any camera. There were no official witnesses, no royal statement, but according to accounts from those close to him, it was one of the loneliest and heaviest moments of his life. The file lay on his familiar desk, thick, dark-colored, with no identifying marks on the outside. Only when he turned the first page and saw Catherine's name, followed by a chain of medical codes stretching back more than 10 years, did William realize this was no ordinary document. The opening pages contained a history of medical monitoring, regular notes, precise dates, hospital admissions described in dry language. No emotion, no extended explanations. Every line was highly technical, as if written to prevent any speculation should it ever fall into the wrong hands. William read slowly. The more he read, the more rigid his expression became. Not because he feared something about to happen, but because he realized how much had happened without his knowledge. Some notes were marked as restricted to the Royal Medical Council only. Some sections were partially redacted. There were even supplemental annotations added many years after the original entries. Together they formed a fragmented picture, a history that had been edited. William was no stranger to secrecy, but the fact that a file directly concerning his wife had been maintained and updated for over a decade without him fully informed left him stunned. According to those who understand William's psychology, his initial reaction was not anger. It was prolonged silence, a kind of silence so heavy that those around him could feel it without explanation. For the next 2 days, William all but disappeared from his usual routines. He did not attend scheduled meetings. He did not answer calls beyond a very narrow circle. The palace offered no official reason. Schedules were simply postponed. What caught many people's attention was that during this time, William reportedly spent his time almost exclusively with his children. No closed-door meetings, no strategic discussions, no visits to advisors. He took the children to school. He stayed home with them in the evenings. Actions that seemed entirely ordinary took on a different meaning in this context, as if he were clinging to the only thing that still felt certain, the small family in front of him, children who knew nothing of the pages shaking his world. One close source described William rereading the same section of the file again and again, not the entire document, but a cluster of notes buried deep in the later pages, notes without clear titles, not emphasized, yet carefully updated year after year. They referred to additional tests, comparative indicators, and observations written with extreme caution. No conclusions, no confirmations, only irregularities recorded and monitored over the long term. It was there, according to those accounts, that William began to understand this story did not end with Catherine's health. It reached into deeper questions, questions that within the royal family are rarely spoken aloud, questions of bloodline, of genetics, of possibilities no one wants to confront publicly, and most importantly, questions about who had known all of this from the very beginning. William's pain did not come from fear of physical loss. Catherine was still there, still the partner he trusted. What wounded him was the feeling of being excluded from part of the truth, the realization that for many years critical decisions had been made while he was only informed afterward. For a man who places immense value on honesty and control, this was a direct blow to his most fundamental trust. 2 days passed in silence. No one knows exactly what William was thinking during that time. But when he reappeared, observers noticed a subtle change. Not obvious, not dramatic, but unmistakable. His gaze was heavier, his movements more restrained, as if he had crossed an invisible boundary. Because what truly caused William pain was not illness. It was the DNA irregularities quietly recorded, buried deep within those seemingly harmless pages. And that was precisely the starting point of a chain of questions that could no longer be easily avoided. If the previous two sections merely revealed early warning signs and William's initial shock, then what lay in the deepest part of the file was the true ticking time bomb. A bomb that made no sound, no announcement, no public reaction, yet powerful enough to shake the very foundations the monarchy had relied upon for generations. This was the section related to genetic testing conducted in silence immediately after Prince Louis was born in 2018. According to speculative sources, the file contained a separate set of documents classified as extremely sensitive. No clear title, no personal signatures. Only data tables and technical observations written in neutral language. It was here that a phrase appeared that made William pause for a long time. Inconsistent paternal markers. A term that did not constitute a conclusion. But to anyone with a basic understanding of genetics, it was enough to sound an alarm. Genetic markers used in paternity testing are not unfamiliar in modern medicine. They are designed to confirm biological relationships with very high accuracy. In the case of Prince Louis, according to what was recorded in the file, several key markers were said not to fully align with William's data. Not all of them, not most of them, but enough to compel the medical team to conduct additional testing. And the need for additional testing was itself the most unusual element. Sources close to the matter suggest the test was conducted immediately after birth. It was not disclosed, not explained, not included in official medical statements like other health information. Everything took place within an extremely narrow circle. Only a handful of individuals had access to the data. What must be emphasized is that the file recorded no definitive conclusion. There was no line stating that Prince Louis was not William's biological son. But there was also no line that absolutely confirmed the opposite. It was precisely this deliberate ambiguity that made the situation dangerous. Because within the royal family, what is not publicly affirmed often carries more weight than spoken words. One marginal note stood out and could not be ignored. The probability of a technical error is estimated at only 0.01%, an extremely low figure by modern testing standards. This did not prove anything, but it made the possibility of random coincidence difficult to accept for those accustomed to working with data. According to the notes, the results were not treated as a routine medical anomaly. There was no expanded reporting procedure, no referral to an independent external counsel. Instead, the file was closed and shifted into long-term monitoring status. Certain markers were noted as requiring future observation, a phrasing highly characteristic of the royal system, neither denial nor confirmation, only postponement. What caused many to question the situation was why an issue this sensitive was not discussed more openly within the family itself. Why William appeared to have gained full access to this information much later than the time of the original test. According to some speculation, the decision to keep it sealed did not come from Catherine personally, but from higher levels, where the primary priority was not a father's emotions, but the stability of the dynasty. If this information had leaked in 2018, the consequences would have been uncontrollable. The media would have questioned bloodline legitimacy. The public would have doubted constitutional standing. Legal and constitutional debates could have erupted. In that context, the safest choice for the palace was to extinguish every risk at its earliest stage. And according to speculative sources, that is exactly what happened. A cover-up plan was reportedly activated. Not loudly, not confrontationally, but quietly and systematically. Files were reclassified, access was restricted, certain medical personnel were replaced. Doctors who had directly participated in the testing no longer appeared on primary care lists. There were no scandals, no public dismissals, only personnel adjustments that appeared routine on the surface. At the same time, Prince Louis's public image was constructed with particular care. Appearances were carefully selected. Symbolic family photographs were released consistently. Every element reinforced a single message: a perfect family, a clear bloodline, nothing to question. To the public, there was no reason to doubt. And indeed, for many years, no one seriously did. For William, discovering these notes was not merely a shock of information. It was a shock of trust. Not suspicion toward Catherine, not doubt about the son he loves, but doubt toward a system that had been operating behind his back, a system capable of making life-defining decisions without the full consent of the person most directly involved. What made the situation even more painful was the deliberate ambiguity of the file. There were no clear answers to hold on to, no conclusion to accept or reject, only unanswered questions hanging in the air. For someone with a deep sense of responsibility like William, it was like being forced to live with a possibility he could neither verify nor dismiss. It must be emphasized that to this day, there is no public evidence confirming these suspicions as fact. Everything remains within the realm of speculation based on documents that are said to exist. Yet it is precisely the palace's choice of absolute silence that allows these theories to continue multiplying. In the world of power and image, silence is rarely neutral. That is why the story does not end with a test result. It opens a much larger question about how the monarchy handles truth, about the boundary between protecting the institution and the right to know of those inside it, and most importantly, about the price paid when stability is placed above everything else. The palace did not allow this matter to surface. It is believed they activated a cover-up plan on an unprecedented scale. But as history has shown many times, no secret lasts forever. And when the pieces begin to shift, the most frightening thing is not the truth itself. It is the moment people realize they have been kept outside that truth for far too long. When genetic suspicions appeared in the file, the palace's response was reportedly not emotional. It was systemic. According to speculative sources, immediately after the sensitive results were recorded, an internal security plan codenamed Project Dove was activated. The name may sound gentle, but it has been associated with one of the most stringent information control operations the monarchy has ever deployed in the modern era. Project Dove does not exist in public records. There are no administrative decisions, no announcements, but indirect signs suggest a coordinated sequence of actions took place. The first step was reportedly a comprehensive review of all medical records related to Catherine and the children. Documents that once existed in full began to show gaps. Lines were redacted, sections were erased, portions were marked as no longer accessible under standard clearance. Dozens of pages, according to descriptions, were blacked out so completely that the original content could no longer be read. Alongside document revisions came personnel changes that were difficult to explain. 3 doctors believed to have been directly involved in the sensitive testing suddenly left the royal medical system. There were no retirement notices, no clear explanations of reassignment. One of them, mentioned in speculative accounts, had previously worked in Geneva. This individual was said to have left Europe shortly afterward, cutting off contact with former colleagues. No one has confirmed this was an act of flight, but the timing of the disappearance has led many to ask questions. Another detail that drew attention was the flow of money. According to speculative documents, a private clinic in the Caribbean region received a 6-figure payment during the same period. This clinic did not appear on the official list of royal medical providers. The reason for the transfer was not clearly stated. It was described only in generic administrative terms. For those who track financial structures, the coincidence of timing and scale made this transaction difficult to ignore. Project Dove, as it has been described, was not designed to erase the truth. It was designed to control how the truth existed. Information that could be misinterpreted was kept within closed circles. Information that could trigger crisis was blurred. And individuals who held the most sensitive knowledge were quietly removed from positions of influence. There was no need for public threats, no need for confrontation, only the assurance that no one would ever possess enough pieces to tell the complete story. What made this plan truly unsettling was its effectiveness. For years, not a single major newspaper raised serious questions. No independent investigation was launched. Every irregularity was explained by 2 familiar words: security. In the royal world, security is not just a right, it is a shield. For William, according to those close to him, realizing the existence of Project Dove was even more painful than the numbers in the test results, because it meant that it was not just a single secret being concealed. It was an entire mechanism designed to keep him outside the truth for many years, a mechanism from which he, as heir to the throne, should have been the first to be informed. Catherine, in all of this, remained silent. No reaction, no denial, no confirmation. But according to speculative sources, it was precisely during the period when Project Dove was operating at its peak that she began keeping private notes. Not medical records, not official correspondence, but personal diaries. Notebooks not intended for the public, not for history, only for herself. Those diary pages, according to rumors, did not focus on science or data. They focused on emotions, fear, the feeling of being controlled, and the inner conflict between her role as a mother and her position as a royal figure. If Project Dove was the story of power and control, then those diary lines are believed to be the story of a human being trapped at the center of the storm. What stood out during this period was that Catherine began withdrawing from the spotlight more frequently, not only because of health, but because of her psychological state. Careful observers noticed her smile becoming more restrained, her appearances more calculated, as if every step had to account for something that could not be spoken aloud. Project Dove may have succeeded in preventing a crisis at that moment, but the price it paid was the erosion of trust from within. No one in the family was untouched. And when a system is built to protect image at all costs, it often leaves its deepest cracks in the places least visible. Amid the storm of redacted data, disappearing individuals, and unnamed decisions, a more emotional discovery began to surface. Not from a laboratory, not from classified files, but from Catherine's private words, lines that may reveal the true cost of prolonged silence. And this is where the story moves to an even deeper level. If Project Dove represents the cold expression of power and control, then what is believed to exist in Catherine's private diaries carries an entirely different tone. Not numbers, not test charts, not dry medical terminology, but the voice of a woman caught between love, fear, and royal duty. According to speculative sources, these diaries were never written for publication. They existed as a way for Catherine to preserve her humanity within a system that demands absolute perfection. The earliest entries are said to describe a deeply pressured journey into motherhood. Catherine is described as having faced fertility challenges from a very early stage. This is not uncommon, but within the royal context, it is not something permitted to become a public topic. According to the diary, doctors proposed highly technical assisted reproductive procedures, methods widely used in modern medicine yet extremely sensitive when tied to questions of royal bloodline. One passage cited in speculation has drawn particular attention. Catherine wrote that she was explained the use of genetic material in a medical procedure intended to ensure a successful pregnancy. The language used in the diary is described as cautious. It does not assert. It does not go into technical detail. But it is sufficient to show that she understood how fragile the boundary was between medical assistance and ethical suspicion. What tormented Catherine was not the procedure itself, but the fear that William would misunderstand its nature. In another passage, Catherine is said to have written about an obsession that followed her for years, the fear of being seen as a betrayer, not by the public, but by the man she loved. She wrote that if one day William were to question Prince Louis, everything would collapse. Not only image, not only the throne, but the trust between two people. And immediately after comes what is believed to be the emotional core of the entire diary. If Louis is not your son, everything will collapse. But I have never betrayed you. According to speculation, Catherine does not deny medical complexity, but she affirms that her emotions were pure. She viewed the decisions made as the desperate effort of a woman who wanted to become a mother within the boundaries allowed by medicine and the monarchy. The diary does not attempt to justify. It does not assign blame. It simply records the silent fear she carried for many years. The fear that one day a misunderstood truth would destroy everything. Those words, if they truly exist, suggest that Catherine was not the center of a conspiracy. She was someone swept into a system larger than herself. A system where silence is sometimes treated as duty. The diary is also believed to record the feeling of being controlled, of not being allowed to speak, not being allowed to explain, not being allowed to face William in the way she wished, because any word could be interpreted in a dangerous direction. The moment William read those diary pages was described as an emotional turning point. No longer the cold detachment of data, no longer the confusion brought on by genetic markers. Instead, it was the direct voice of his partner's heart. According to speculative sources, William read each line slowly. He paused for a long time at the passages describing the fear of being doubted, and for the first time since opening the file, he broke down in tears. These were not the tears of an heir to the throne. They were the tears of a husband, a father. A man who realized that behind every plan and every mechanism of control, there was a human being who had endured unbearable pressure in silence. Catherine did not ask for forgiveness. She only hoped to be understood. And it was precisely that which, according to accounts, touched William more deeply than any number ever could. However, what truly surprised the royal household was not William's tears. It was the decision believed to have taken shape immediately afterward. Instead of demanding further clarification through new tests, instead of activating additional layers of control, William was said to have chosen a different path, one that placed family above cold scenarios of power. According to speculation, he decided to leave everything as it was, not reopening the file, not revisiting the past, not allowing Project Dove to intervene any further. For William, what mattered was no longer the explanation of every medical detail. It was protecting Catherine and the children from an endless spiral of suspicion. This decision, if accurate, was an emotional choice rather than a political one. And precisely because of that, it shocked the entire royal system. Because in history, few heirs have dared to place their hearts above carefully prepared safety scenarios. William was said to understand that sometimes the most important truth does not lie in classified files. It lies in words written out of fear and love. And that was the moment when the story shifted onto a different path. One where the decision of a single human being could shake a system long believed to be unchangeable. When doubts reach the question of lineage, the consequences do not stop at personal emotions. In the royal family, that is when the issue of succession is immediately placed on the table. According to speculation, as soon as internal reports were reviewed, some advisors began outlining emergency scenarios, not for public release, but to prepare for the worst case if one day Prince Louis's legitimacy were to be publicly questioned. One option believed to have been discussed was adjusting the future line of succession. Instead of keeping Louis in his current position, one scenario considered elevating Princess Charlotte higher on the list. Charlotte was seen as stable, less controversial, and most importantly, not directly connected to the genetic doubts being concealed. This was not an official decision, but the fact that it was discussed at all revealed the seriousness of the situation behind palace doors. William, according to speculative accounts, reacted strongly to those scenarios, not with an outburst of anger, but with a brief and firm statement during private discussions. "Louis is my son, regardless of what the paperwork says." This sentence was said to have made the atmosphere in those meetings grow heavy, because it was not only the voice of a father, it was the stance of a future king. For William, protecting Louis was not simply about protecting a child. It was about drawing a line between family and institutional machinery, a line that had rarely been clearly drawn before. William was said to understand that if files and speculation were allowed to dominate, none of his children could grow up normally. And that realization made him willing to confront even the most conservative thinking within the system. Another shocking detail emerged when old documents were reviewed. According to speculation, King Charles was said to have known about certain sensitive medical issues from a very early stage, even before the marriage between William and Catherine took place. Some internal records are believed to note that Charles had been briefed on potential risks, but still allowed the wedding to proceed. The reasoning was interpreted not as disregard for risk, but as a belief that William's happiness and stability mattered more than scenarios that might never materialize. The number that stunned many was more than 100 related documents sealed at the highest level. Among them were letters believed to be handwritten by Charles containing a brief but loaded message: "Let the marriage proceed." If this line truly exists, it suggests that the decision to allow the marriage was not born of ignorance. It was a considered choice, a choice that placed human beings above institutional anxieties. This makes the picture far more complex, because if Charles knew and accepted it from the beginning, then the story is no longer about a secret completely concealed. It becomes an unspoken agreement across generations, a silent consensus that some things are best kept within the family, and that the price of stability is prolonged silence. In that context, Catherine remained outside all political discussions. But the pressure on her continued to grow, not only the pressure of a mother, but the pressure of someone placed at the center of every suspicion. According to speculation, it was precisely when she realized that her silence was creating space for dangerous scenarios that Catherine began to consider a step she had never taken before: breaking the silence, not through files, not through lawyers, but through her own direct voice before the public, a speech not meant to explain medical details, but to affirm what mattered most: family, love, and emotional truth. This was believed to be the most difficult decision Catherine had ever made, but also the most liberating. Because when a royal woman chooses to speak from the heart rather than through official statements, every cold calculation becomes fragile. And that moment was said to open the next chapter of the story, a chapter in which the world no longer saw Catherine only as a flawless symbol, but as a human being who dared to stand in the storm to protect her family. The moment Catherine stepped onto the podium was not announced by any media campaign. There was no background music, no grand setting, just a modestly lit room, rows of journalists sitting in complete silence, and Prince William standing quietly beside his wife. That simplicity made the world hold its breath. Because everyone understood this was not a ceremonial speech. This was the moment a woman chose to say aloud what she had carried in her heart for many years. Catherine began in a calm but steady voice. She did not avoid the big questions. She did not use vague language. She acknowledged that on her journey to motherhood, she had relied on assisted reproductive procedures, a deeply personal medical decision, a choice made under immense pressure. She said it was not easy to share, but prolonged silence had caused too much speculation and too much pain. What silenced the room was not the admission of medical procedures. It was the way Catherine spoke about Prince Louis. She did not mention tests. She did not argue over data. She spoke only of motherhood. That from the very first moment she held Louis in her arms, she knew he was her child, not through genes, but through love. That Louis grew up in the arms of two parents who were always present, always loving, and for her, that was the most important truth of all. Throughout the speech, William did not say a single word, yet his presence carried more weight than any sentence. He stood there. He did not step back. He did not avoid the public gaze. When Catherine said that Louis was their child in both love and responsibility, William placed his hand on her shoulder, a small gesture, but powerful enough to send a clear message. This is my family, and I will not allow any doubt to shake that. Catherine ended her speech with a simple appeal. She did not ask for pity. She did not demand forgiveness. She only hoped the public would see that the royal family is also made up of people who face difficult choices like any other family. Choices that are never perfect, but are made from love and responsibility. Public reaction unfolded faster than anyone expected. Harsh doubts on social media gradually gave way to empathy. Many people for the first time saw Catherine not just as a flawless symbol, but as a mother who had endured too much in silence. Commentary began to shift in tone, from questioning to defending, from scrutiny to understanding. Not all doubts disappeared, but something essential changed. The focus of the story was no longer lineage. It was the choice to stand with family. Catherine's speech did not erase the past, but it put an end to letting the past define the present. And in that moment, the truth revealed was not found in classified files. It was found in the way a mother and a father stood publicly side by side, before the entire world. Under the spotlight of history, there are secrets that seem powerful enough to tear apart an entire dynasty. This story was not just about a question of bloodline. It was a ruthless test of love, trust, and forgiveness within a family forced to appear perfect in the public eye. A single truth buried for years almost turned Catherine into a figure of judgment, almost pushed William into a painful choice between heart and duty, almost made innocent children victims of power and paperwork. But the worst did not happen, because in the end, love overcame fear. Understanding stood firm against suspicion, and forgiveness saved a family on the brink of collapse. The British royal family today is no longer a symbol of cold perfection. They appear as human beings of flesh and blood, with wounds, with mistakes, with tears. And it is precisely the truth, however painful, that has bound them closer than ever before. And what about you? What do you think about this drama? Is Louis truly William's biological son or not? Leave a comment number 1 or number 2 as mentioned at the beginning of the video. Do not forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you do not miss the next royal secrets. Thank you for watching until the very end. See you in the next video.